Could knowing your genetics or your DNA optimize your exercise programming? I'm a fan, of course. I use my own DNA testing, and I've tested and shared with several of my clients. But my guest today is educating me on genetics, and you too. So listen over my shoulder as I talk with Dr. Sam Shay and go into a deep dive about what it means for optimal sleep, eating, even supplementation. But really, what does it mean when you're retaining water? And what does it mean when you're exercising and you're actually gaining, not even losing, not losing, but you're gaining weight? So, don't miss this episode with my guest, Dr. Sam Shay. This episode is brought to you by my DNA testing of choice, Toolbox Genomics. But you may want to listen, take notes even from Dr. Sam Shay, and get his ebook so you're really schooled on what it is that you're listening for, looking for in the feedback that you get about your genetics. Unlike lab tests, your DNA snips don't change, so you can test once and find that it supports your compliance to following things that you potentially have the gut instinct to know are right, and easily then reject fads that are oh so sexy and those trends that may be all wrong for you. Let's dive in. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles, your concerns, and your hopes and inspirations. I share what to eat, how to move, and how to change your mindset about both of those things so that you can have the energy and the vitality that you want, need, and deserve in the second and better half. My guest today is Dr. Sam Shay. He is a doctor of chiropractic, and he helps busy, health-conscious entrepreneurs and mom-preneurs increase their energy, resilience, and stop the clock from the effects of aging so they can create and sustain a healthy and free life. Dr. Shay has dedicated his life to helping others through functional medicine and functional genetics. He's recently authored a new ebook on genetics where you can learn the different types of genetics-based weight gain. Yeah, you heard that right. How to future-proof your brain, food triggers, how to genetically determine your optimal carb tolerance. Yep, I'm thinking we need to do this. Vitamin D absorption, and immunity support. And we will be sharing how you can get access to that free book later in the podcast. So for now, you can sit back and listen. And Sam Shay, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so listeners are really going to be interested in this. So first of all, genetics are something that, in the last few years they've been Christmas presents, for crying out loud, for people giving them. And even I do some genetic testing or DNA testing with clients. And I'd love to know, so how is your genetics approach different from others?
Sure. So the genetics is a very sexy topic, as you alluded to, and there's three different ways to look at genetics. One is genealogy, which is like what percentage Irish are you, like which is what these Ancestry or other similar type kits are given out, and so that's not what I'm talking about. The other type of genetics is what I call Western or allopathic genetics, where it's akin to germ theory. There's the one germ causes one disease. Well, in allopathic genetics, it's one gene causes one disease. We're looking for the one gene that is the problem, the rogue gene, the bad gene, and they're trying to find the gene that, like, what is the cancer gene, the heart disease gene, the Alzheimer's gene, the dementia gene, and so on. And I know it's the autoimmune gene. And that approach can be extremely useful. And that's still not the approach that I take. I'm looking at the functional genetics model, which is not looking for the heart disease gene, the cancer gene, the Alzheimer's gene, the autoimmune gene, the diabetes gene. It's looking at the cluster of genes above them that control the entire physiology that when they go off, then provoke and trigger those quote unquote disease genes. So the processes above the quote disease genes are look for the major genes that control inflammation. And I'm sure your listeners know that what we can ballpark what percentage of all chronic issues, whether it's stubborn weight gain or these other with the weight that go away or health issues, etc., what percentage is related to inflammation? At least 80+%, at least. And so there's the inflammation cluster. Then there's the free radical quenching genes, particularly the three main genes that quench free radicals in the mitochondria. Then there's the liver detox genes, 8 major ones for the geeks out there, the 3 major ones in phase 1 detox and 5 in phase 2. Vitamin D receptor genes, how well you utilize vitamin D, which is today a very important topic, as we all know, of your ability to absorb and use vitamin D. The next set of genes would be methylation, and I'm not, and the people have mistakenly just chased after MTHFR as if it's some sort of magic bullet, and I'm going to be able to tell you that there's at least 12 other genes that surround and affect MTHFR directly in the methylation cycle. Really more like 15 major ones. There are a couple of extras as well, but what people don't know is that the inflammatory genes are actually above the methylation genes. So if your inflammation genes are acting askew, it's going to affect methylation actually downstream. So there's even hierarchies amongst the functional genetic clusters. And I get very frustrated when people fixate on a singular functional gene, on a singular gene like MTHFR, because it's out of context. There's so many other things that influence it and that can affect it. Then there's cardiovascular and circulation genes, and then there's the fat and energy metabolism genes. So it's basically like there's 7 major categories: inflammation, free radicals, liver detoxification, vitamin D utilization, methylation, cardiovascular and circulation, fat and energy metabolism as the functional genetics approach that is upstream from the disease-based gene approach.
Love it. What a great explanation. Yeah. I mean, and we could probably spend an entire podcast like diving into any one of those, but I love how you've, yeah, yeah, how you've loved and you've laid it out, clearly and why you're doing what you're doing. But I actually want to stop right there. So why this? Why genetics when, you could have, expressed your expertise in so many ways? How did you stumble into this is the thing that I really need to help people?
Well, the reality is it is just one of the things that I use. So for all you Dungeons and Dragons enthusiasts out there, I'm what you call multi-classed. So I'm a chiropractor. I also have an acupuncture degree from New Zealand. I've studied nutrition for over 20 years, starting with Weston A. Price back in like 2000. I've was trained by one of the top osteopaths in Australasia. I was trained in physical therapy as well. I'm not a physical therapist, but I was trained in many elements of it. I've been studying nutritional like naturopathic style interventions for many years. And I also had past tense a diplomate and a fellowship in functional neurology. I've since let that go since I've done 100% virtual, and really to do neurology, you need to be face to face with somebody. And now I'm also a member of the Institute for Functional Medicine and a certified practitioner for the Kalish Institute for Functional Medicine. And I've done a lot of mind-body stuff on top of that, whether it's going through the work of Byron Katie's training or other many things. And it's I've cross-trained across so many things, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And genetics is one of the latest things I've had to learn because I had a lot of chronic health issues myself growing up. And with both my parents being medical doctors, raising a child in the 80s, they didn't know anything about actual natural health. And I had very unwell, and I was basically told it was all in my head. And here's some psychiatric medication to shut you up. And I'm sorry to say that, but that was the truth. And I had to learn the hard way very hard lessons that natural health is not one subject. It's not even just genetics, not by a long shot. It's all these different elements that have to be addressed. I have a whole separate model called the 10 Pillars of Health, which is definitely don't have time to talk about it on this podcast. But I have developed a framework that accounts for the 10 major factors that go into analyzing someone's health and well-being. Brain and hormones is the first pillar, bowel and digestion, second pillar, body structure and genetics, the third pillar, burst exercise and movement is the fourth, biotoxins and terrible foods for fifth pillar, bionutrients and sustenance for the sixth pillar, breakfast and routines, the seventh pillar, bothers and stressors, the eighth pillar, bugs and hidden infections, the ninth pillar, bedtime and sleep is the 10th pillar. And I had to learn a huge amount in all 10 of those pillars to pull me out of my own, health hole. And then I notice I said healthful, not something else.
Yeah.
And I also noticed when working with clients who had chronic issues that weren't resolved from jumping from one practitioner or protocol or product to the next, they had a minimum 7 out of 10 pillars crumbling. And most practitioners, products, and protocols, if they're honest, are really good at 1 to 3 pillars, well trained in 1 to 3 others, and not so well in the other 4. And if you're sitting on 7 or more tacks and you remove 2, you're technically healthier, but you're not feeling better. It's having this kind of synergized approach, addressing all facets of one's health, is the way not only to help people get out of things they've been struggling with chronically, whether it's autoimmune, hormone imbalances, stubborn weight, fatigue, pain, etc. It's the exact same model I use with mom-preneurs, entrepreneurs, biohackers, life extension enthusiasts, human potential, whatever aspirational label they want to call themselves. It's the exact same model, 10 pillars plus functional testing and functional genetics to identify where have people been over-focusing, where have been people neglecting, using labs like genetics, like other labs like mitochondria, adrenal, hormonal, gut testing, etc., to clarify based on the best science we have. I find that functional medicine, including functional genetics, we use the best of Western medical diagnostics with the best of natural medicine lifestyle interventions. And that is the bridge I believe we need in today's healthcare to use all the best tools we have and to make peace between Western medicine and natural medicine. I believe it's functional testing, including functional genetics, is that bridge. Natural medicine has the tools to help people get better. Western medicine has the fun diagnostics, as well as the emergency stuff we need when it's no longer a wellness issue, it's an acute case that needs immediate stabilization. So we can all play together, in this health sandbox. We just have to know where to apply what skill set. And I feel that genetics is a huge tool that has just basically been opened to the entire public. And there's a lot of confusion out there on how to use it. And I feel that this approach, the functional genetics approach that I just described earlier, is the best way to capture as much benefit from genetics information without the massive amount of overwhelming confusion that comes when people get 600 genes tested and they're given 300 health tips in no order of priority. So genetics for me is one of the critical tools. And I can't sit here and say it's the thing, because I've had experience in practice where we ran the genetics, did all the right things, got the lifestyle, everything corrected, and they were still having problems. And I have a time limit. If the genetic stuff doesn't start really working within 1 to 2 months, we then pivot to do functional testing, like check the gut, check the adrenals, check the mitochondria, check the liver. And sure enough, this person had some whopping hidden infections that were preventing all the benefit from the genetic stuff, because genes can't check for infections because those are different genes. Those are not you. Those infections are different things. So there are limitations on genetics. Like, it doesn't tell you what your hormones are now, what infections you have now, what your mitochondrial state is now. That's what functional testing is. So ideally, you do both genetics, functional genetics, and functional testing at the same time. But for people who don't want to or haven't allocated the resources to do both at the same time, you can do the genetics. And if things aren't working in the first 1, 2, maybe 3 months, you then pivot to functional testing. There's something else blocking the benefit. And in this client's case, it was some ripping infections. So I'm just repeating myself. I love genetics, love genetics. And I don't want people to think for a second it is the only thing you ever need to look at.
Great explanation again. So I feel like I'm going to repeat myself with you several times today, but I want to for listeners. So, I mean, anytime we're talking weight loss, ears perk up. And in my audience, it's menopause has been a struggle for a lot of women. And suddenly, we're not necessarily even talking about a woman being obese, but a woman who's 10 pounds more than she feels like this is my normal and I feel good. And she can't figure out how to get where she wants to go. Your ebook talks about the 3 different genetic weight loss types. Can you describe them and how women who are listening, who want to be fit, healthy, and at an ideal weight in menopause and beyond might be doing things against their own genetics?
Absolutely. So I mentioned the 7 major categories of the functional genetics: inflammation, free radicals, liver detox, vitamin D, methylation, cardiovascular, and fat and energy metabolism. And so when I analyzed people in my practice that did their genetics and were struggling with stubborn weight, I found genetically there were 3 main patterns. One was inflammatory / water weight. The other was hormonal / toxic weight. And the other was fat / calorie weight. And so I'll go into each of those in detail. So how do you know if you have inflammatory / water weight? Okay. I believe many of your listeners will have the experience of like gaining 4 pounds, losing 4 pounds, gaining 6, losing 5. Get like this yo-yo up, down, up, down, up, down. And it doesn't really make any sense. Like I just ate this tiny little muffin and I'm suddenly 4 pounds. Like unless that muffin, 4 pounds more, unless that muffin was last year's re-gifted Christmas fruitcake, it didn't weigh 4 pounds, right?
Right.
So for our listeners, I also do stand-up comedy as a hobby. My YouTube channel has a stand-up comedy playlist.
But this isn't funny.
It's the best way to make it's the best way to make the discussions weight loss palatable. See, I get that little wordplay that's stuck in there. Humor,
you're good.
Yeah. Do that. Okay, is it working? The best way to make things palatable that are very emotionally complicated issues, such as weight. Humor is the best way to make the message more palatable. So I use humor as a clinical imperative to make things lighter as opposed to so heavy, and it just helps everyone. So anyway, going back to the last year's regifted fruitcake. So if you eat a tiny little muffin and gain 4 pounds, the muffin didn't weigh 4 pounds. So why the 4 pounds? Here's why. What's in that muffin triggered so much inflammation that the body retained water in order to dilute the toxic inflammatory chemicals so they wouldn't harm and destroy your important organs and other cells. And it diluted the toxic chemicals to do what? Buy time for the liver to detox said inflammatory chemicals. That's the yo-yo weight that happens with inflammation. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I think you are worth the price of admission right now. We could just wrap up. Yeah.
Okay. It was nice talking to you, Deborah. Appreciate
it. Okay. Yeah. Bye. Okay. Stay here.
So that's the inflammatory water weight. So when people have a genetic vulnerabilities in their inflammatory gene cluster, then they are prone to either. So there's 15 major pro-inflammatory genes. It's not useful to name all 15 off the top of my head. It's because that's only for the super nerds, and you can get my ebook and look at those if you want. But there's 15 major, and so we're going to talk about not specific of those 15 genes. We're going to talk about the clusters. It's the clusters that are important. If people within inflammation, there's a cluster of initiating inflammation, like sparking the fire. There is propagating the inflammation, meaning it's continuing on, and then there's extinguishing the inflammation. So if people have problems in those initiation, propagation, or extinguishing inflammation, then there can be over inflammers, particularly the people who can't extinguish. Because if you can't put out a fire, it doesn't matter how small the fire is, it's going to burn something eventually. So I'll give you an example. It's not just the muffin issue that people put on weight. There's the other issue that a lot of women struggle with, and also men, that the more they exercise, the fatter they get. Now, talk about demoralizing.
Right, right. And everybody right now is listening. So if you're doing something else, come back to us.
Yeah. So the more you exercise, the fatter you get. That is an absolute red flag for your hyperinflamer. Here's why. Exercise is wonderful until you overdo it. Then you tip into anti-inflammatory into pro-inflammatory. And what happens when you become overinflamed? You do what? Retain water to dilute the toxic inflammatory chemicals because your body's being intelligent, saying, do we want these toxic inflammatory things running around destroying our organs and tissues? Or are we going to retain all this water to put on some weight? Okay, yeah, big bummer, but we're protecting what's important, which is our organs and tissues. It's going to protect. So certain people who are overinflamers, they have a lower threshold for the amount of exercise they can do before it tips into being pro-inflammatory. So I had two clients. I've lectured in genetics conferences on this particular topic, and strangely enough, it actually wasn't. I mean, I have a couple case studies with women, but the two that actually got into the conference was actually on men. So I know. So hang with me, even though this is podcast specific towards women. It's totally translatable. These guys were, they were overweight. The more they exercised, the fatter they got, and the more their joints hurt. And they both had man boobs. Now, I don't have some weird fascination with man boobs. It's just that I'm a clinician. My job is to be observant. And I saw that, and I was like, I wonder if their genetics would reveal that they were overinflamers and they had problems with their liver detox and estrogen detox pathways, so that the more they exercised, the more inflamed they got, which means their liver got overwhelmed, which means the liver smartly prioritizes detoxing immediately harmful inflammatory chemicals and shoves detoxing estrogen to the side as a lower priority. And if estrogen circulates more than it should, it will deposit fat in different areas of the body, like the chest. So when I ran their genetics, sure enough, both of these gentlemen had really unlucky dice rolls in their inflammatory genes and their hormone detox genes as well. But their fat and calorie burning genes were near perfect. It had nothing to do with calories. It had everything to do with inflammation and their ability to detox, particularly estrogen. So what I did for them was not put them on an exercise and a diet, which is what they've been trying for years and totally backfiring and being demoralized by more weight, more pain, etc. What I did was I put them on a anti-inflammatory, liver-supporting diet with anti-inflammatory, liver-supporting nutrients, got them off all the exogenous or external sources of estrogen. One guy had a bunch, everything from like hot food and microwave plastics, in inorganic vegetables with lots of pesticides that mimic estrogen. There's a bunch of external sources of estrogen. One guy lost 20 pounds. Sorry, he lost 20 kgs. That's over 40 pounds in 1 month. Another guy lost 1 kg a week for 14 weeks straight. Okay, and it wasn't from I actually told him to not exercise more, but to move more, walk, not over exercise. And that's the power of the genetics testing revealing, okay, this is the direction we're going here. And that example perfectly maps onto my other female case studies. One in particular, a client of mine, without telling me, went and got some, this is a family-friendly show, so I'm not going to swear. She got she inside voice. All right. She got one of these CrossFit trainer. We'll call him a trainer. Um,
Mm.
uh, and this CrossFit quote unquote trainer was of the opinion of the more you exercise, the better it's going to be, the more frequently, the harder, etc.
Ugh,
Okay, so
I'm
I
nauseous. I
I
just
get a
threw up
panic.
a little bit.
No, I'm trying to. There's a joke amongst chiropractors that if you don't like a patient, you recommend they do CrossFit until they injure themselves and refer them to another chiropractor you don't like. That's
Jeez.
don't tell anyone. Make sure this doesn't. Don't tell
Right.
Phil.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So anyway, I get this panicked message from her saying she's losing her muscle tone, she's getting fatter, and her hormones are off.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I said, what happened? Like, well, I got a new trainer, and I'm like, oh God, please no, please no, please don't say CrossFit, please don't say CrossFit. It was CrossFit, no. Okay, anyway, so what happened now? And by the way, I don't mean to rip on CrossFit. For people who don't have this pro-inflammatory profile, you can see why they do fine in CrossFit, right?
Right.
Like they don't
Right.
have, so it's not ripping on CrossFit. It's about matching the tool for the job. And for some people, CrossFit, they're fine, until they overdo their box jump and whatever, but and then get mechanically injured. I'm talking about inflammatory injury. This is a different type of injury here.
Yeah.
So people can get inflammatorily, if that's a word, injured in CrossFit if they're genetically vulnerable to such things. So she was. So what happened is that not only did her muscle tone wash out, she got fatter, her cycle went off, way off. So I said, okay, let's just have a look at the genetics and see what we see. And sure enough, she was massively pro-inflammatory in all three areas. In fact, she is the case study I put in the eBook. If you want to see the genes and the clusters and everything, it's all there. And she had a particular microcluster in inflammatory genes in the three CRP genes, which are the major inflammatory control genes for acute inflammation as it resolves in the liver. So what is CrossFit? A lot of acute inflammation.
Yeah.
Okay, then in her liver detox genes, she also had a lot of problems detoxing estrogen. So what happened? Her liver genes for inflammation were overreactive. She had lots of inflammation. Plus, she had problems detoxing estrogen in the first place, which meant she was retaining all this water and her hormones got completely messed up because her liver was like, I'm real busy right now dealing with this inflammation stuff. I'll come back later, estrogen. Sorry. So that explained for the men, the examples you had before, it was gaining more weight and man boobs. For the women, it was gaining more weight and the cycles going off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So for her, it was her own version of the liver supporting and anti-inflammatory diet, nutrients, and lifestyle, and cut way down. Only 2 times exercise per week with at least 2 days in between for recovery. Lots of movement, not exercise, movement in between. And good news, weight normalized, hormones came back totally fine. She's now she's spending way less time in the gym with better results based on her genes.
So good. So good. Probably, Sam, I'm going to say that to our listeners, this is the hardest lesson for those who are exercise lovers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually had a client in New Zealand who was a budding. She was a late teens bodybuilder, and she was watching all these damn videos, gym bunnies on YouTube, who were saying, "Just exercise all the time; it'll be great. Look at my thighs, isn't they wonderful?" And she just got really lost in the dysmorphia of it all, and she just kept exercising, and she developed psoriasis. Her muscle tone started washing out, and she's like started about all these health problems, and like she was convinced that the more exercise, the better, because of these gym bunnies on YouTube. And I had to argue with her parents in the room that she had to cut down to at most 3 times of exercise a week, and she was having a near panic attack
Yeah.
over not being able to exercise. And I said, look, she had terrible psoriasis on her skin, like, and her muscle tone wasn't, like, it was clearly washing out. I could see it. And I said, look, just give me a couple months. We're going to just do this test for a couple months. Can you do just a couple months? And she begrudgingly agreed. And sure enough, it worked. Except she didn't follow up with me. Like, I asked my clients to, like, maintain contact and we have some continuity. And she got mesmerized again by these gym bunnies. And she reverted back because she got so hypnotized by YouTube. So even though she saw her muscle tone came back, psoriasis stuff went away, like, everything improved, she got hypnotized by the addicts on YouTube who showing off their thigh and butt muscles. Okay.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I mean, with every piece of evidence pointing you or me and listeners, I'm talking to you, to the fact that it's not working, we still, change is hard. Changing your mind between that 6 inches between your ears is one of the hardest things you'll do.
Yeah. And look, as someone who overcame 2 addictions myself, and was part of my trials when I was growing up, I overcame sugar addiction and video game addiction. I had sugar addiction for 15 years, video game addiction for 25, and those both developed starting at age 6 to cope with everything that was really rough growing up. I fully appreciate, I really do, I fully appreciate the struggle that comes with having a chosen advice, a chosen thing to self-soothe, whatever it may be. For a time for another podcast, I also have a completely novel approach to addiction called Tame the Beast of Addiction, BEAST. It's a 5-phase approach to dealing with addiction, whether it's exercise or food or screens or whatever. And it's the only model out there that can explain all other models of addiction. Like, and it's a unifying model that everyone can now start in the addiction space, can start working together instead of fighting with each other over whose model is better. It's a meta model. And it's the same model used to help people. And it includes functional medicine, includes testing, includes lifestyle, and includes genetics, and includes all the other stuff that goes into the complexities of addiction. And addiction it's not a single magic bullet fix. It's not. It's actually many layers of complexity on top of just a mere health issue. And there's obviously lots more to be said on that. But as you can tell, health, wellness gets very, very complex very quickly, and which is why it's so helpful to have frameworks and models to kind of wrap one's mind around it, whether it's this genetics approach, 10 pillars, or addiction.
Absolutely. And Sam, I can tell you, we've skimmed the surface of so many things. So, one of the questions I'm going to ask for listeners is, where can they get in touch with you to learn more about their genetics? And very specifically, and maybe this is one and the same answer, where can they get a copy of your free ebook?
Sure. So my website is drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. It's not SHEA like the stadium. It's drsamshay.com. And you'll see a picture of the cover of my ebook on genetics. Is on the homepage, and you scroll down. I've got also another ebook called Biohack Your Biohacking, which is on functional testing and the 10 pillars of health. A couple other ebooks also, but you just go to the website and they can get the ebook there. If people want to chat with me, I have a health discovery strategy call available on my website as well, and under the contact page. If people want to learn more about genetics and how we can apply this model and process to your particular situation, I'm here to help.
Thank you so much. So, listeners, that is for Sam's free ebook, Your Missing Genes, the revolutionary method to find your ideal diet, balanced weight, and help stop the clock of the effects of aging. So, I'll link to that in the show notes. If you're walking, you're driving, you're weight training, and maybe you're just resting, you've really been listening, it'll be in the show notes. Okay, Sam, while I have you here, you are the expert. You know even better than I. What I should have asked you, is there a question that I missed?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me, why can't I get this info from 23andMe or Ancestry? And the answer is you can get some of it, you can't get all of it, because there's another test we didn't really have time to talk about, which is carb tolerance. That's a very unique genetic test that's not checking for variants, like if it's a homozygous or a heterozygous, whatever. It's actually checking for copy numbers, like the number of duplicates of a specific gene that controls your ability to process carbohydrates. And so I'm a second lowest carb tolerance you can have, and which means I have to eat like somewhat like an Eskimo. And you can't get that through 23andMe and Ancestry. Like the genetics test that I just talked about, it comes as part of a package of 4 other genetics tests that are also amazing and super important, but given the time constraints, we only just focused on that one. And you want to synergize all the genetics information together as one package, whether it's the food triggers genetics, knowing your carb tolerance, which really determines your diet for literally the rest of your life. The find your balanced weight, your healthy weight that we just talked about for the majority of this. There's a specialized advanced vitamin D profile and a specialized immunity profile, which is, very relevant in today's day and age. You really can't get those through 23andMe and Ancestry because you can't get the carb tolerance test at all. So I would encourage people to not hold on with 2 hands the preciousness of the 23andMe and Ancestry stuff as the one Rosetta Stone that you need to understand your genetics information. So there are other genetics approaches and other gene clusters and important things to look at.
So good. So good. Thanks so much for that. And listeners, your turn. If there's a question that you wish I would have asked, please leave that below the show links or with the show notes, and that'll be at flipping50.com/genetics. And you'll find all of the show notes, all of the links and resources that we've mentioned in today's show, just as you always will. And I would so love, if this has been valuable, that you leave a rating and a comment in iTunes. And these days you do that from your mobile phone. And I'd love you to answer one more question. Would you love to have Sam back to talk about addiction? Love to hear that. So what are you waiting for? Let's start flipping 50 today.